When you think life is over, that's often the moment when God begins to write the most surprising chapter of your story. I know it sounds contradictory, but after turning 70, alone in Naperville, Illinois, I truly believed my life had come to an end. My children had grown distant, my health was failing, and loneliness had become my only companion. Every day felt like proof that maybe I had been forgotten by everyone except God. My name is Bailey Parsons. I'm 71 years old, retired, and for a long time, I felt like my story no longer had any meaning. The walls of my room seemed to echo abandonment, and my prayers faded into the silence of the house. I wasn't expecting anything extraordinary, and yet, on a night that seemed just like so many others, something happened that no one could have made up. It was a simple prayer, almost a whisper, but filled with so much faith that it changed everything. In the very moment I surrendered, something unseen entered the room, something that brought peace, warmth, and a certainty that words can't fully explain. God reminded me in a clear and undeniable way of a truth I had forgotten. I never left you. And that's exactly what I want to share with you today. Because if you've ever felt forgotten, if you've ever believed your story was over, you need to know this. There is a power strong enough to turn the darkest night into light and hope. My experience is not just a testimony. It is living proof that when God visits our hearts, nothing ever stays the same.
Sometimes the silence of a house can be louder than any noise. After I turned 70, I realized that every corner of my living room carried memories, but no presence. The clock marked the hours with a ticking sound that seemed to mock my loneliness. I would look at the dining table, far too big for just one person, and wonder if that emptiness would ever be filled again. I know I'm not the only one who has ever felt this way. Maybe you've also come home and felt like the walls spoke louder than people. It's hard to face the reality that we long for hugs but find only silence. Many times I ask myself if my story had already ended there, and when those thoughts come, they try to wipe out even our faith. On those days, I tried to stay busy, organizing old photo albums, watering the plants, watching TV shows I wasn't really interested in. It was just a way to pass the time. But inside, my heart remained heavy. You know, that emptiness that feels like it has no end? I found out it can't be filled with distractions. It asks for something much deeper. At times, the longing for my children became almost unbearable. I looked at pictures from when they were little, with their innocent smiles, and wondered what had happened to that connection. The silence of the house echoed that absence. And it's amazing how the noise of loneliness can be deafening. Have you ever felt that? Many nights I close my eyes and ask myself, is anyone thinking of me right now? Prayer felt distant, as if God were too busy to hear me. It was in that battle between faith and discouragement that I felt completely lost. But it was exactly in that inner struggle that I began to see something that would change everything. And without even realizing it, the silence that once crushed me began to open space for another reality, one I couldn't yet understand. After all, sometimes it's in the emptiness that God prepares the ground for a new story.
I always heard people say that children grow up and follow their own paths, but I never imagined it would mean so much distance. Peter, my oldest son, rarely called. Julia, my youngest daughter, would stop by once in a while, but always in a rush, as if my presence were just another item on her to-do list. It's hard to admit, but I felt pushed aside. I don't blame them completely because I know modern life is demanding. Work, responsibilities, commitments, everything seems bigger than a 5-minute phone call.
But deep down, a single call can rescue a heart that's on the edge of breaking. How many nights did I pray to God, asking only for a word from them? It's strange how we spend our lives teaching, caring, protecting, and suddenly find ourselves forgotten. I've even caught myself wondering, did I fail as a mother? But I came to realize it's not about failure. It's about how the world teaches us to prioritize the wrong things. The testimony of my life with them was not in vain, yet their absence often made it feel like none of it mattered. I remember one time when I prepared a dinner, waiting for visits that never came. I cooked Julia's favorite dish, set the table with care, even placed flowers in the center. The clock kept ticking, the hours passed, and at the end of the night, I ate alone. That dinner felt like an unanswered prayer. Or maybe it was just a different kind of answer than the one I was hoping for. Even so, I tried to believe that God had a purpose, even if my eyes couldn't see it. Deep inside, I felt He was still writing a greater story, even when the pen seemed to have stopped. But like it happens with so many of us, my faith wavered. And in those moments, the weight of loneliness seemed to double. It was in that place of absence and waiting that life reminded me of something I wanted to ignore. My body was no longer the same. The frailty of my health began to show more clearly, and that deepened the feeling of abandonment even more. As the days went by, I began to realize that my body no longer responded the way it used to. Climbing the stairs became a challenge, carrying grocery bags felt like carrying the whole world, and even opening small jars took more effort than I had. It was as if my health kept reminding me, with every little movement, that I was no longer the same. There were days when the pain in my joints kept me sitting in the armchair for hours, staring at the ceiling without the strength to move. In those moments, I spoke to God in silence, as if every sigh was a prayer. I would say, "Lord, even to stand up, I depend on you." That dependence was painful, but it also reminded me that He never gets tired of carrying our burdens. What's interesting is that physical weakness also affects the mind. When strength fades, hope seems to want to leave as well. I felt like a plant forgotten in the corner of the room, still alive, but no longer blooming. That thought troubled me, but it also made me reflect. Could God still use someone as limited as me? Some people say that aging brings wisdom, but I'll be honest, at times I only felt disposable. Doctors gave instructions, prescribed medicine, and I followed them, but without much motivation. It was as if my body were a broken clock that insisted on keeping the wrong time. Yet, in the midst of that weariness, I began to notice that even pain can become a testimony. During that process, I learned small habits that helped me face the hard days. Reading short devotionals in the morning, listening to hymns that speak of God's faithfulness, or even writing down in a notebook the things I was still grateful for. These practices didn't heal my body's pain, but they nourished the faith within me. And even with all those limitations, something unexpected began to happen. God used someone I never imagined to show me that care was still around me. A neighbor who would knock on my door with simple gestures, but filled with meaning. In the middle of so much absence, God always finds a way to remind us that we are never completely alone. For me, that reminder came in the form of Nancy Miller, my neighbor. She wasn't close to my family, nor did she visit my house often, but every now and then she would knock on my door with a bowl of hot soup or ask if I needed something from the store. Sometimes I even found it a little funny because Nancy seemed to have a sixth sense. She always showed up on the very days when my faith felt the weakest. Her visits were never long, but her smile and the kindness in her words were enough to ease the weight on my heart.
It's amazing how such a simple action can be like a prayer expressed through a gesture. I remember one specific day when a fever left me so weak I couldn't even prepare dinner. Nancy showed up with a dish of roasted chicken and said, "I thought maybe tonight you shouldn't cook." I smiled on the outside, but inside I cried with gratitude. It's in those small details that we see how God uses ordinary people to write extraordinary stories. And yet, as kind as she was, Nancy couldn't fill the emptiness inside me. Her care was like a candle lit in a dark room. It brought some relief, but it couldn't drive the darkness away completely. I knew I needed something much greater, something only God could do. That contrast made me reflect, how often do we underestimate the power of small gestures? A phone call, a quick visit, a meal on the table? All of these can be a living testimony of faith in action. If I had the strength, I would have wanted to do the same for others. But at that moment, I was only on the receiving end. And it was during this time, when Nancy's presence brought light to my daily life, that I experienced a completely different kind of night. A night when neither she, nor my children, nor anyone else could be there with me. A night when only God could enter that silent room.
There was one night when loneliness didn't just knock at the door, it settled deep inside me. I was sitting in the armchair in the living room, staring out the window, when I realized it had been hours since I'd even heard my own voice. The clock was close to midnight, and suddenly I felt swallowed by a deep emptiness, as if life had completely lost its meaning. The darkness felt heavier than usual. Every shadow in the house reminded me that no one was coming, that there were no footsteps to wait for, no voices to hear. It was as if the house itself shouted the absence of my children, of family, of everything that once made me feel like I belonged somewhere. In that moment, I asked myself, does God still remember me? It wasn't just a passing thought. It was a pain so real it felt suffocating. My heart was racing, my mind wouldn't stop replaying memories from the past, and along with them came the heavy weight of abandonment. I thought, maybe I don't matter to anyone anymore. And it's frightening how convincing that thought can become when you're too alone. I remember holding an old photo in my hands, me, Peter, and Julia when they were still children. Their smiles made me cry in a way I hadn't cried in years. These weren't tears of relief, but of despair. In that moment, I realized not even memories could comfort me. It felt like I had reached the bottom of an emotional pit. That night became the strongest battle between faith and despair. I kept asking myself, is it worth continuing to pray? Because honestly, my prayers felt like they went no higher than the ceiling. And yet at the same time, something inside me refused to give up. It was as if a quiet voice whispered, "Talk to me one more time." And it was in that fragile state, in the silence of that midnight hour, that I chose to do what seemed pointless. I got down on my knees and whispered a prayer that would change the course of my story.
That night, with no strength left to find the right words, I simply closed my eyes and spoke to God just as I was. Tired, broken, fragile. I didn't give speeches. I didn't prepare rehearsed sentences. I only whispered, "Lord, if you are still with me, please don't leave me now." It was a short prayer, but it carried everything I had left inside me. So often we think prayer needs to be long, filled with carefully chosen words, but that's not true. Real prayer is born out of honesty, not performance.
I learned that right there on the cold floor of my room, with my heart laid bare, empty of everything except the desperate need to know that God still saw me. As I spoke, I felt my tears soaking the pillow. They weren't tears of anger, but of surrender. It was as if I were saying, I don't know what else to do, but I know who I can trust. That trust, even if small, became the thread that held me together that night when it felt like there was no way out. I remembered the stories in the Bible of people who cried out in their desperation, like Hannah weeping for a child, or the psalmist who said, "Out of the depths I cried to you, Lord." That made me realize my testimony wasn't being written on the easy days, but on the days when faith felt like a nearly invisible thread. After that prayer, nothing visibly happened right away. There were no thunders, no audible voices, no instant miracles, but something inside me began to stir, like a tiny flame trying to rise in the middle of the darkness. It was subtle, but it was real. And suddenly, in the midst of that absolute silence, I felt a presence I cannot explain. It was as if someone had entered the room without opening the door.
As I was still wiping away my tears, something strange happened. The room, once so cold and heavy, began to change. I felt a gentle warmth that seemed to come from within me, yet at the same time surrounded me completely. There was no sound, no external light, but it was as if a different atmosphere had settled there. In that moment, I knew I was no longer alone. I can't explain it logically because it wasn't something my eyes could see. It was something my soul recognized. It was a peace I hadn't felt in years, an invisible rest that reached even the most weary places in my heart. For a second, I thought it might just be my imagination. After all, who would believe that a 71-year-old woman in a dark room could experience something so supernatural? But the more I tried to doubt, the more real that presence became. It was as if God Himself was there, unhurried, simply reminding me, "I hear you." I remember staying completely still, almost afraid to move, not wanting to interrupt what was happening. That simple prayer, which had felt so weak, had turned into an encounter. And in that encounter, I realized that faith doesn't need explanations. It needs surrender. Many people look for grand signs, voices from heaven, visible miracles, extraordinary manifestations. But with me, it was different. It was something intimate, quiet, yet completely transformative. It was as if God Himself had chosen that very room as an altar, and that very moment as the answer to my cry. And in the middle of that atmosphere of peace, a phrase echoed within me so clearly that I couldn't ignore it. In the middle of that silence, filled with peace, something happened inside me. I didn't hear it with my ears, but with my heart. A phrase echoed, clear and steady, impossible to ignore. "I never left you." It was as if every syllable carried a strength that pierced through my weary soul. For years, I had felt forgotten by family, by life, even by myself. But hearing those words in my spirit was like having a knot finally untied. It was the reminder that even when everyone around me had drifted away, God had stayed. It wasn't theory, it wasn't a Sunday sermon, it was a living reality right there in my room. I wept in a way I hadn't wept in decades, but they weren't tears of despair, they were tears of recognition. Recognition that in every fall, in every lonely night, there had been someone holding me up without me realizing it.
Those words were more than comfort. They were an eternal promise. And if you've ever felt forgotten, you may understand a little of what I mean. It's like finding a hidden letter that had always been there, waiting for the right moment to be opened. In that moment, I knew my story would no longer be about abandonment, but about God's faithfulness, a faithfulness that neither fails nor fades with time. The walls of the room were the same, the pain in my body was still there, but inside me, everything had changed. That silent voice brought a freedom no medicine, no human embrace, no distraction could ever give. It was as if the weight of years had been lifted off my shoulders. And it was in that very relief that something unexpected happened. My tears, which had always been born of pain, began to carry a new meaning. They became the most freeing tears of my life. In that moment, the tears started pouring down like a flood. But for the first time in a long while, they weren't tears of loneliness. They were tears that washed my soul, as if each drop carried away years of stored-up pain. I sobbed, and with every sob, it felt like there was room again for hope to breathe inside me. It was as if God Himself was gathering those tears, turning each one into seeds of faith. I had cried so many times before, but always out of sadness, frustration, or abandonment. This time, the tears were different. They were healing. They were freedom. They were like a river that had finally found its course after being dammed up for so long. I remember holding that old photo of my children against my chest, and instead of bitterness, I felt compassion. I wasn't crying anymore over what I had missed, but because of the certainty that something new was still ahead of me. Prayer and tears blended together, and in that quiet room, a new vision of my own story was born. You know that feeling when you take a deep breath after being suffocated for so long? That's exactly how it felt. The air seemed lighter, my heartbeat steadier, my heart calmer. Nothing around me had changed instantly, but inside, I was no longer the same woman. I knew something sacred had happened there. Those tears became a turning point, a line that divided my life in two. Before, I lived as someone who was just getting through the days. After, I began to live as someone who had found purpose. And when we understand that faith can be renewed even through tears, we discover that every pain can be turned into a testimony. And it was that new strength that gave me the courage to finally make a decision I had been putting off for years, to return to church and reconnect with the community of faith I had left behind. The following Sunday, with my heart still light from the tears of the night before, I decided to return to my local church. Pastor Harold Green welcomed me with a hug that seemed to say, "You've always belonged here." In that moment, I felt that every step I took down the aisle was not just physical, but also spiritual. There were people I knew from other times. Some remembered me, others were curious. But what mattered most wasn't the memories or the looks. It was the feeling that I was finally home. That place, which had once felt distant, was now becoming part of my renewed faith story. As I sat in the wooden pews, I realized how the prayer from the night before had opened space for gratitude. Every corner of the sanctuary seemed to whisper, "You are not alone." For the first time in a long while, I truly felt that connection, a silent testimony that God still works in the lives of those who seek Him. Pastor Harold shared words about hope and faithfulness, and something in him seemed to speak directly to my heart.
I realized I didn't need grand miracles to feel God's presence. I only needed to be open with faith and a sincere heart. Reuniting with the church became a moment of renewal. During the service, I looked at the faces around me and felt that a spiritual family was waiting for me. Faith isn't just personal, it's built in community. Coming back to church showed me that even when we feel forgotten, there is always a place to be welcomed, to have our stories heard, and to strengthen our spirit. And it was there, among the songs and collective prayers, that I realized something new was about to happen in my life. Something or someone would enter this chapter in an unexpected way, bringing even more light to my journey. It was during this period of reconnecting with the church that I met Lauren Scott, a young woman in the congregation with a huge heart. She approached me with a genuine smile and said she wanted to pray with me. At first, I'll admit I was hesitant, but something about her faith gave me the courage to say yes. Lauren taught me that prayer doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be sincere. She held my hand and repeated simple words, encouraging me to open my heart. Each prayer we said together seemed to break down another layer of fear and loneliness that I had carried for so long. I had never imagined that a spiritual friendship could be so transformative. Her youth reminded me that God can use anyone, regardless of age, to fulfill His purposes. With Lauren, I realized that my story could still inspire even after turning 70. Her visits and prayers became part of my routine. Some afternoons, she would simply sit with me, share her faith experiences, and encourage me to trust God more. It was as if every gesture of hers was a living testimony of love and compassion in action. I felt that this connection renewed not only my faith, but also my energy to live. Praying together became a source of strength, and the sense of spiritual belonging I felt was finally becoming real. And as Lauren's presence brightened my days, something unexpected began to happen outside the church. Peter, my eldest son, would start to feel the weight of the distance and silence that had separated us. Months had passed since I started reconnecting with the church when, one day, unexpectedly, Peter called. His voice sounded different, softer, carrying something I hadn't heard in years. Regret and longing. My heart raced, and a mix of joy and caution washed over me. He explained that the distance hadn't been easy for him either. Work, responsibilities, and above all, guilt had kept him away. Hearing his words felt like hearing an echo from the past, transform into the present. Finally, the emotional distance was beginning to fade. During his visit, we both felt the need to talk about everything that had been left behind. I shared about my prayers, my tears, and without even realizing it, my testimony had become an example of faith and endurance. He listened, surprised by the strength I had found in God. Peter apologized for every absence, every forgotten moment, and I responded with an open heart. I realized that true reconciliation isn't just about saying the right words. It's about feeling the presence of the other and allowing forgiveness to grow. The prayer that had once been silent was now taking tangible form. I understood that this closeness didn't just heal my loneliness, it eased his guilt as well. It was a moment of mutual restoration, where God's faithfulness and patience had built a bridge between our hearts. I felt that God had orchestrated every step, even when I couldn't see it. And as Peter and I rebuilt our relationship, something inside me became clear. My life was not over at 70. On the contrary, God was leading me into a new chapter, full of opportunities and surprises.
In that moment, I realized that life after 70 isn't an ending, it's a new chapter. The loneliness, the pain, and the distance had only been the prelude to something greater. God showed me that every difficulty had a purpose, preparing me to see what could still flourish in my story. I began to get more involved in church activities, participating in prayer groups and sharing experiences with people who, like me, were seeking renewal. Every conversation, every exchanged smile reminded me that faith is practical. It's living daily in connection with God. Taking care of myself again also became part of this new beginning. Short walks around the neighborhood, reading devotionals and small spiritual books helped strengthen my body and mind. I discovered that even small habits can be living testimonies of faith and gratitude in action. Lauren's presence continued to encourage me, and Peter and Julia started to draw closer. The family began to reorganize, but in a way that respected my new freedom and the space I needed to grow spiritually. I felt that God was writing something beautiful chapter by chapter. This season taught me that it's never too late for change. Every prayer, every tear, every act of faith becomes learning and strength. The past stopped being an anchor and became a springboard for new experiences and opportunities to share my testimony. And so, with a renewed heart and faith more alive than ever, I reached the point where I could look back at my story and see that every challenge, every moment of loneliness had prepared me to share something much greater.
Today, when I look back, I see that every tear, every night of loneliness, and every silent prayer were preparing the ground for this moment. My story has become a testimony, proving that God never abandons us, even when everything around us seems forgotten. Sharing my life with others has become a mission. I talk about faith, hope, and the certainty that even on the hardest days, a single prayer can change everything. My heart rejoices knowing that my experiences can inspire those who face similar struggles. God's presence has become more real than ever. He used the loneliness, distant children, my physical fragility, and even the kindness of Nancy and Lauren to show me that nothing happens by chance. Every detail of my story is a reminder of His care. Today I feel whole, not because everything is solved, but because I have learned to trust. I know that faith isn't the absence of difficulties. It's the certainty that God walks with us every step of the way. And that is the testimony I want everyone to know. We are never alone. And that's why I choose to share my story with anyone who wants to listen. Here on the Faith Story channel, I found a safe space for others to share their stories and see that hope always exists. So I ask you, which part of your story still needs faith to be transformed? Are you ready to open your heart, believe again, and let God guide your path? Share in the comments, inspire, and be inspired.